Chaos erupted on the luxury private jet as flight attendants frantically apologized to the tall black man in an expensive suit. Just minutes earlier, they'd humiliated him. Now they begged for mercy as he calmly announced, "I'm Jamal Washington, your CEO. You're all terminated, effective immediately." Sometimes a lesson needs to be taught the hard way. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story of justice served, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more incredible stories of people standing up against discrimination. Now, let's rewind to see how Jamal Washington became the powerful CEO who wouldn't tolerate disrespect on his own airline. Jamal Washington's journey to becoming CEO of Skyline Airways was anything but conventional. Growing up in South Chicago's toughest neighborhood, he learned early that the world wouldn't hand him anything because of the color of his skin. His mother Denise, a hospital custodian working double shifts, instilled in him an uncompromising work ethic. "Education is the one thing they can't take from you," she'd tell him every night as he studied by lamplight at their kitchen table. When other boys his age were joining gangs, Jamal was securing academic scholarships and devouring books about aviation and business strategy. By 17, his brilliant mind and determination had earned him a full scholarship to MIT, where he graduated with dual degrees in aerospace engineering and business administration. Despite graduating at the top of his class, Jamal faced countless rejections from airline executives who couldn't seem to envision a black man in their boardrooms. "I remember sitting in 38 different lobbies, wearing the same carefully pressed suit," Jamal later revealed in a rare interview. "And I remember 38 different receptionists looking surprised when they matched my resume to my face." His breakthrough came when Carlton Hayes, the first black airline executive in the country's history, saw something special in the young man. Hayes had broken barriers himself in the 1980s and recognized the same hunger and brilliance in Jamal. "Carlton didn't just give me a job," Jamal often said. "He gave me a mirror, showing me what I could become in an industry that wasn't built for people who look like us." Under Hayes' mentorship, Jamal climbed rapidly through the ranks at Meridian Airlines, revolutionizing their operational efficiency and customer service protocols. When Hayes retired, he recommended Jamal for increasingly senior positions. By 35, Jamal had become the youngest chief operations officer in commercial aviation. 2 years later, when struggling Skyline Airways needed new leadership, their board took the unprecedented step of hiring Jamal as CEO, making him one of the few black chief executives in the entire industry. The decision raised eyebrows across the corporate world. "Let them doubt," Jamal told the board chairman Franklin Pierce when accepting the position. "Doubt fuels excellence." Within 3 years, Jamal had transformed Skyline from a failing regional carrier to a respected national airline known for innovation and customer satisfaction. His secret weapon was simple but revolutionary: he regularly traveled on his own airline incognito, experiencing the service as customers did and making improvements based on real experiences rather than reports and metrics. But success came with its price. His marriage to college sweetheart Aisha couldn't withstand the demands of his position. Their divorce 3 years into his tenure at Skyline left him with limited time with his teenage daughter Zoe, a gifted pianist who had inherited her father's determination and her mother's artistic spirit. On this particular Thursday, Jamal had made a promise he was determined to keep. Zoe had a piano recital in Atlanta, her first major performance, and he promised to be there, front row, no matter what. A board meeting in New York had run long, forcing him to book a last-minute flight on his own airline. "I'll travel like any other passenger," he told his assistant Laura as he changed from his executive suit into casual jeans and a simple button-down shirt. "No special treatment, no announcements. I want to see how our Atlanta route is really performing." Little did he know, this routine quality check would become a defining moment not just for his career, but for the entire airline industry. Skyline Airways Flight 1387 to Atlanta boarded precisely on schedule, a point of pride for Jamal, who had implemented systems reducing Skyline's delay rates by 47% since taking over as CEO. Dressed in dark jeans, a navy button-down shirt, and his favorite worn leather jacket, Jamal blended in with the business-casual crowd boarding the Thursday afternoon flight. As he approached the jet bridge, he observed the boarding process with his trained eye. Lead flight attendant Heather Brooks, a tall woman with meticulously styled blonde hair, greeted passengers with practiced efficiency. Behind her, flight attendants Tyler Reynolds and Ashley Murphy directed travelers to their seats. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson." Heather beamed at a middle-aged white man in a golf shirt. "So lovely to have you flying with us today. Can I show you to your seat in first class?" When Jamal approached moments later, boarding pass for seat 2A in hand, Heather's smile tightened noticeably. Her eyes flicked down to his boarding pass, then back to his face with unmistakable surprise. "Down to the left," she said curtly, without making eye contact. No greeting, no welcome, no offer to show him to his seat as she had done for the previous first-class passengers. Jamal noted the interaction in his mental log but said nothing. As CEO, he'd learned to observe first, act later. Once seated in the spacious first-class cabin, Jamal continued his observations. Ashley Murphy, a petite brunette with a perpetual frown, seemed to be providing a different level of service depending on who she was addressing. "Can I take your jacket, sir?" she asked a white passenger across the aisle. "And would you prefer a sparkling water or orange juice before takeoff?" When she turned to Jamal, she simply passed by, making no offer to take his jacket or provide a pre-flight beverage. After the third white passenger in first class received attentive service while he sat unacknowledged, Jamal began discreetly documenting the discrepancies on his phone. He noted times, specific actions, and the names visible on the crew's badges. When the drink service began after takeoff, Jamal politely raised his hand to get Ashley's attention. "Excuse me, could I get a sparkling water, please?" Ashley glanced at him but continued serving another passenger. 5 minutes later, Jamal tried again with Tyler Reynolds, a young man with closely cropped hair who seemed to be new to the crew. "Sir, I'll get to you when I can," Tyler replied loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We're serving people in order." But Jamal noticed this order somehow kept placing white passengers ahead of him and the only other person of color in first class, an elderly Indian woman who had also been repeatedly overlooked. Darren Miller, a white businessman seated beside Jamal, seemed to notice the pattern as well. After receiving his scotch on the rocks from a smiling Heather while Jamal's request remained unfilled, he turned to Jamal. "Have they still not served you?" he asked, brow furrowed. "That's weird. I've been watching this happen for 20 minutes now." "It happens more than people realize," Jamal replied quietly. "That's unacceptable," Darren said, looking genuinely disturbed. "You should complain." Jamal smiled slightly. "I'm documenting everything." The tension in the cabin grew as the flight progressed. When meals were served, Jamal's special request meal, noted in his frequent flyer profile, was mysteriously lost, while every other pre-ordered meal found its correct passenger. "We can give you whatever's left after everyone else is served," Heather told him with thinly veiled impatience. By 2 hours into the 3-hour flight, the discrimination had become so obvious that several passengers were exchanging uncomfortable glances. The elderly Indian woman had given up requesting service entirely and sat reading her book in resigned silence. What none of the crew realized was that the quiet man in seat 2A wasn't just any passenger being subjected to substandard service. He was the architect of their entire service protocol, and he was witnessing firsthand how his own standards were being selectively applied based on nothing but the color of passengers' skin. 2 hours and 17 minutes into Flight 1387, the systematic discrimination reached its breaking point. As Jamal worked quietly on his laptop, he overheard lead attendant Heather Brooks speaking to Tyler Reynolds near the forward galley. Though they thought their conversation was private, their voices carried clearly to the first row of first class. "I don't know how he got a seat up here," Heather said, with a subtle nod toward Jamal. "Probably using someone else's miles or got a free upgrade. They always act entitled when they don't belong." Tyler glanced nervously at Jamal but chuckled along with Heather's comment. Should I ask to see his boarding pass again? That's the third time he's pressed the call button. Just ignore it for now, Heather replied. Focus on the passengers who actually appreciate premium service. Jamal closed his laptop slowly, his expression unchanging despite the burning sensation spreading through his chest. Throughout his career, he'd encountered this brand of casual racism, the assumption that his presence in premium spaces was somehow fraudulent. But to hear it from employees of his own airline, that cut deeper than he expected. Rising from his seat with deliberate calm, Jamal approached the galley where Heather and Tyler stood. Both flight attendants straightened immediately, their expressions shifting to professional neutrality. "Excuse me," Jamal said, his voice measured and steady. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation, and I'd like to request that you treat all passengers with equal respect regardless of their appearance." Heather's face flushed. "Sir, I assure you we treat all our passengers with the utmost. I've been seated in 2A for over 2 hours," Jamal interrupted politely. "I've been denied pre-flight beverages, my meal request was lost, and I've pressed the call button 3 times without response. Meanwhile, every white passenger in this cabin has received prompt, friendly service." Ashley Murphy, who had been restocking a cart nearby, moved to stand beside Heather, forming an unconscious united front against the passenger questioning their service. "Sir," Ashley said with exaggerated patience, "may I see your boarding pass again? Just to confirm you're in the correct cabin." It was the third such request since boarding, though no other passenger had been asked even once. Several nearby passengers had now turned to watch the interaction, the tension palpable in the cabin. "My boarding pass hasn't changed since you last checked it," Jamal replied evenly. "What has changed is my patience for discriminatory treatment. I'd like your full names and employee IDs, please." "We're just doing our jobs," Tyler protested weakly. "Are your jobs to provide different levels of service based on skin color?" Jamal asked, his voice still calm but carrying enough to make several passengers murmur in agreement. Darren Miller from the adjacent seat stood up. "I've been watching this whole flight. They've repeatedly ignored you while serving everyone else. It's blatant and embarrassing." Heather's professional demeanor cracked. "Sir, if you continue to disrupt this flight, we'll have to involve the captain." "Please do," Jamal replied. "And while you're at it, I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Heather exchanged glances with Ashley before reluctantly providing their names and employee numbers, which Jamal noted on his phone. Tyler, looking increasingly uncomfortable, followed suit. "I'm making a call," Jamal informed them, taking out his phone. "And I expect the in-flight supervisor to meet me when we land." The crew clearly assumed he was calling Skyline's customer service line to file a complaint. Heather rolled her eyes subtly at Ashley as Jamal stepped away to make his call. What the crew didn't realize was that Jamal wasn't calling customer service. He was calling Samantha Taylor, the Chief Operations Officer of Skyline Airways, who answered on the first ring. By the time Jamal returned to his seat, Flight Supervisor Kevin Peterson had been summoned from the back of the plane. A stocky man with a receding hairline and an air of authority, Peterson approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to handling difficult passengers. "Sir, I understand there's been some misunderstanding with our service today," Peterson began, his tone condescending. "There's no misunderstanding," Jamal replied. "There's been clear discriminatory treatment, which I've documented and several passengers have witnessed." Peterson's expression hardened. "Sometimes passengers misinterpret busy flight attendants as being intentionally neglectful. I can assure you our crew doesn't discriminate." "Then how do you explain the consistent pattern of service on this flight?" Jamal asked. Peterson leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, making accusations won't get you special treatment. Maybe in the future, you should know your place and be grateful for the service you receive." The words hung in the air between them. Know your place. The phrase echoed in Jamal's mind, words he'd heard too many times throughout his life, from elementary school teachers to college professors to airline executives. "I know exactly what my place is," Jamal replied so quietly that Peterson had to lean in to hear him. "And in 15 minutes, you're going to know exactly what it is too." As Peterson walked away with a dismissive shrug, Jamal returned to his seat, where Darren Miller watched with concern. "You okay, man?" Darren asked. "That was rough to watch." "I'm fine," Jamal assured him, checking his watch. "But they won't be. Not in about 14 minutes and counting." As Flight 1387 touched down at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, an unusual announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson speaking. We've arrived at our destination slightly ahead of schedule. All flight attendants, please report to the jet bridge immediately upon arrival." I repeat, all flight attendants to the jet bridge immediately upon arrival. The announcement caused visible confusion among the crew. Heather and Ashley exchanged worried glances, while Tyler nervously adjusted his tie. Passengers began murmuring, sensing something out of the ordinary was happening. While the cabin prepared for deplaning, Jamal slipped into the lavatory with a small carry-on bag that had remained untouched in the overhead compartment. When he emerged 3 minutes later, he was transformed. Gone were the casual jeans and button-down shirt, replaced by an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and subtly patterned tie. He'd even changed his shoes from comfortable loafers to polished Oxford dress shoes. As the airplane door opened, the flight crew lined up as instructed on the jet bridge. Their confusion turned to apprehension when they spotted a woman in an executive suit waiting just beyond the gate. Samantha Taylor, Chief Operations Officer of Skyline Airways, stood with perfect posture, her expression unreadable as she consulted her tablet. When Jamal stepped onto the jet bridge, Samantha immediately approached him. "Mr. Washington, I came as soon as you called." "I'm deeply sorry for the situation," she said, loud enough for the crew to hear. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Heather's face drained of color. Ashley's mouth fell open in shock. Tyler looked as though he might be sick. Flight Supervisor Kevin Peterson, who had joined them on the jet bridge, froze mid-step. "Thank you for coming personally, Samantha," Jamal replied, straightening his cuffs as he fully stepped into his role as CEO. Turning to face the crew, he allowed the silence to stretch uncomfortably as recognition dawned in their eyes. "For those who haven't pieced it together yet, I'm Jamal Washington, Chief Executive Officer of Skyline Airways. The airline you work for. The airline whose core service values include equal respect for all passengers regardless of race, gender, or background. The airline whose CEO you just spent 3 hours discriminating against because of the color of his skin. Do you think Jamal was right to travel incognito to experience his airline service firsthand? Comment 1 if you believe leaders should experience their company as customers do. Hit that like button if you're invested in how this confrontation plays out, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice being served. But seriously, what would you have done in Jamal's position when the flight supervisor told him to know his place? Let's continue with this incredible showdown. Heather was the first to attempt damage control. "Mr. Washington, sir, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Had we known who you were?" "That's precisely the problem," Jamal cut her off. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to provide equitable service. The fact that you're suggesting you would have treated me differently if you'd known my position only confirms the discrimination." He turned to Tyler, whose face had gone from pale to bright red. "Mr. Reynolds, when I asked for water after being ignored for 45 minutes, you told me you were serving people in order. What determined that order?" Tyler opened and closed his mouth, finding no acceptable answer. Jamal continued, addressing Ashley. "Ms. Murphy, you asked to see my boarding pass 3 separate times. How many times did you ask to see Mr. Thompson's boarding pass? Or Mrs. Whitfield's? Or any other white passengers?" Ashley stared at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Finally, Jamal turned to Kevin Peterson. "And you, Mr. Peterson, told me to know my place and be grateful. I'd like you to explain what exactly you meant by that statement. Peterson stuttered, Sir, I never intended, that is, I meant passengers should understand the challenges flight crews face. Interesting, Jamal replied coldly. Because from where I was sitting, it sounded remarkably like you were telling the only black man in first class to remember his proper station in life. By now, passengers deplaning behind them had stopped to witness the confrontation. Several had their phones out, recording the scene. Darren Miller stepped forward. Sir, I sat next to this gentleman the entire flight, he said, addressing Samantha. The treatment he received was shameful. I've never seen such obvious discrimination on a flight before. Jamal nodded in acknowledgement of Darren's support before returning his attention to the crew. When I founded Skyline's service principles, I made it clear that this airline would stand for equality. I personally wrote the training materials many of you apparently ignored. I've experienced discrimination throughout my life, but I never expected to experience it on my own airline, from my own employees. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Samantha, please ensure that Ms. Brooks, Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Murphy, and Mr. Peterson are removed from the schedule effective immediately. Their employment with Skyline Airways is terminated. Heather gasped. You can't do that. We have rights. This is completely unfair. What's unfair is discriminating against passengers based on race, Jamal responded. What's unfair is creating a hostile environment on my airline. What's unfair is betraying everything this company stands for. As if on cue, several journalists appeared at the end of the jet bridge, alerted by Samantha as part of Skyline's transparency protocols for major incidents. Ms. Taylor will provide you with information about final pay and benefits, Jamal continued. But make no mistake, Skyline Airways has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. That policy applies to everyone, from baggage handlers to flight attendants to executives. With those final words, Jamal straightened his tie and walked past the stunned crew members. He had a piano recital to attend, and he refused to let the ugliness of discrimination make him break another promise to his daughter. The terminal outside Gate C-17 had transformed into an impromptu press conference. Passengers from Flight 1387 clustered around the edges, many recording on their phones as the fired crew members were escorted away from the jet bridge by airport security. The scene was chaotic. Heather Brooks was shouting about lawsuits and injustice, while Tyler Reynolds walked with his head bowed, visibly fighting back tears. Ashley Murphy argued loudly with a Skyline manager who had arrived to collect their company IDs, and Kevin Peterson maintained stony silence, his face flushed with humiliation. Samantha Taylor, the COO, stood beside Jamal as he addressed the gathering crowd with remarkable composure. Skyline Airways was founded on principles of equality, respect, and exceptional service for all passengers, Jamal stated, his voice clear and unwavering. What occurred on today's flight was a direct violation of those principles. I experienced firsthand what too many travelers face daily, service influenced by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character or the class of their ticket. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution pushed forward. Mr. Washington, is it standard practice for you to fire employees on the spot? It is standard practice for Skyline to have zero tolerance for discrimination, Jamal replied. When I founded this airline 5 years ago, I made that policy abundantly clear. Every employee signs an understanding of these core values upon hiring. Another journalist called out, were there witnesses to this alleged discrimination? Before Jamal could answer, Darren Miller stepped forward from the crowd of deplaning passengers. I sat next to Mr. Washington for the entire flight. The treatment he received was appalling. The crew repeatedly ignored him while providing attentive service to white passengers. When he politely questioned this treatment, he was met with hostility and told to know his place. I'd be happy to provide a formal statement. Several other passengers nodded in agreement, including the elderly Indian woman who had also experienced neglect during the flight. From the back of the impromptu gathering, Brandon Lewis, Skyline's head of human resources, arrived slightly out of breath. A tall black man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Brandon quickly assessed the situation before approaching Jamal. "Sir, I came as soon as Ms. Taylor called," he said quietly. "I've initiated the termination protocols and have a team ready to process the paperwork." Jamal nodded. "Thank you, Brandon. Ensure they receive everything they're legally entitled to, no more, no less." As security escorted the former crew members toward the terminal exit, their reactions spoke volumes about their characters. Heather Brooks maintained her indignation, loudly proclaiming, "You haven't heard the last of this. You can't just fire people for doing their jobs." Tyler Reynolds, by contrast, seemed to have collapsed into himself, his earlier bravado replaced by the dawning realization of what he had participated in. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, though it wasn't clear if he was apologizing to Jamal or lamenting his own situation. Ashley Murphy alternated between tears and anger, while Kevin Peterson maintained rigid silence, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. A young woman from Skyline's PR team approached Jamal with urgent whispers about managing the developing story, but he held up a hand to pause her concerns. "Transparency is our policy," he said firmly. "We don't hide from our mistakes, we address them and do better. Schedule a company-wide town hall for tomorrow. This becomes a teaching moment for our entire organization." Checking his watch, Jamal turned to Samantha. "I need to get to my daughter's recital. Can you handle things from here?" Samantha nodded confidently. "Of course, sir. Your car is waiting at the VIP exit. I'll manage the situation and brief you later." As Jamal began to move through the terminal, passengers and airport staff alike stared in recognition. Some applauded spontaneously. Others nodded in respect. A few approached to shake his hand or offer words of support. "Thank you for standing up," said an older black man in an airport maintenance uniform. "Some of us don't have the power to fight back when it happens to us." Jamal clasped the man's hand firmly. "That's exactly why those of us with power must use it responsibly." Making his way toward the exit, Jamal couldn't help but reflect on the irony. He had built Skyline Airways partly because of the discrimination he'd faced as a passenger on other airlines. He'd created rigorous training programs and clear policies to prevent exactly what he'd experienced today. The betrayal stung deeply, but the swift consequences sent a clear message throughout his company: discrimination wouldn't be tolerated, regardless of who the target was. As his driver navigated Atlanta's afternoon traffic toward the Performing Arts Center where Zoe would be playing Chopin in less than an hour, Jamal forced himself to compartmentalize. He wouldn't let the ugliness of the day's events overshadow his daughter's moment. For the next few hours, he would be nothing but a proud father. What he didn't yet realize was that videos of the confrontation were already spreading across social media platforms, and the hashtag #SkylineJustice was trending nationally. By the time Zoe struck the final note of her recital, Jamal Washington would be more than a CEO, he would be a symbol in America's ongoing conversation about race, power, and accountability. While Jamal sat in the darkened auditorium watching his daughter's fingers dance across piano keys with remarkable precision, his phone, silenced but still visible, lit up with a barrage of notifications. By the time Zoe received a standing ovation for her flawless rendition of Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, the incident on Flight 1387 had exploded across the internet. The hashtag #SkylineJustice had reached #1 trending status on Twitter. 3 separate videos of the confrontation, captured by passengers, had collectively garnered over 2 million views in just hours. News networks were interrupting regular programming for breaking coverage of what was being called a watershed moment in corporate accountability. After embracing his daughter backstage with fierce pride, Jamal finally checked his messages. 47 missed calls. Over 300 text messages. Thousands of email notifications. "Dad, why is your picture on everyone's phones?" Zoe asked, noticing other recital attendees glancing at their devices and then at her father. Jamal sighed. I had to handle a work situation today. It looks like it's getting more attention than I expected. Zoe, perceptive beyond her 15 years, studied her father's face. Was it about race again? The question held the weariness of a child who had grown up watching her father navigate spaces not designed to welcome him. Jamal had never shielded Zoe from the realities of being black in America, believing that preparation was a form of protection. Yes, sweetheart. But this time, I was in a position to do something about it. As they left the recital hall, Jamal's security detail, usually discreet to the point of invisibility, closed ranks around them. News vans had already gathered outside. Mr. Washington. Can we get a statement about the fired Skyline crew? Jamal. Do you stand by your decision to terminate employees on the spot? Is this a publicity stunt for Skyline Airways? Shielding Zoe from the cameras, Jamal guided her to their waiting car, offering only a brief comment. Skyline Airways has always stood against discrimination in all forms. Today's actions reflect that commitment. Once safely in the car, Zoe pulled up Twitter on her phone. Dad, you're everywhere, she said, scrolling through thousands of posts. People are really divided about what you did. Indeed, public response had fractured along predictable lines. Many praised Jamal's decisive action as a long-overdue example of consequences for discriminatory behavior. Others accused him of executive overreach and questioned whether the punishment fit the crime. Conservative commentators were already framing it as cancel culture run amok, while civil rights leaders hailed it as a rare example of corporate accountability. Jamal's phone rang again. Natalie Chen, Skyline's Director of Public Relations, calling for the fifth time. He finally answered. Natalie, I'm with my daughter. Can this wait until, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt your family time, but former flight attendant Heather Brooks just gave an interview to News Center 5. She's claiming racial bias against white employees and calling it a publicity stunt. The clip is going viral. Jamal closed his eyes briefly. What's our response? We're maintaining your statement about zero tolerance for discrimination, but sir, she's hired William Bennett as her attorney. Bennett was a high-profile lawyer known for representing employees in wrongful termination cases, particularly those with political or racial dimensions. His involvement signaled that this was rapidly evolving from an internal company matter to a public spectacle. Stick to the facts, Natalie. We have multiple witness statements and will release the customer satisfaction data for that crew if necessary. No personal attacks, no defensiveness. After ending the call, Jamal noticed Zoe watching him intently. Is this going to be like the Maxwell situation? She asked, referring to a previous corporate crisis that had consumed weeks of Jamal's life when she was younger. I hope not, but it might be, he answered honestly. The car pulled into the circular driveway of their Atlanta home, where more reporters had already gathered. As security cleared a path to the door, Jamal kept his arm around Zoe's shoulders. Inside, they found relative peace, though Jamal's phone continued its relentless notifications. After ensuring Zoe had dinner, he retreated to his home office to assess the situation more thoroughly. Online forums had exploded with debate. On Black Experience. Com, a popular forum for discussing race-related issues, users shared their own stories of discrimination on airlines. Flight attendant forgot my meal 3 times but remembered everyone else's. Hashtag Skyline Justice is long overdue. Been flying first class for business for 15 years. Still get asked if I'm in the right seat every single time. This isn't just Skyline, it's every airline. Washington just happened to be the rare black person with enough power to do something about it. Meanwhile, on conservative platforms, a different narrative emerged. CEO on power trip ruins careers over perceived slights. This is what happens when DEI goes too far. Whatever happened to progressive discipline? These people lost their livelihoods without due process. Has anyone considered these attendants were just having a bad day? Now they're branded as racists forever. Scrolling through the comments, Jamal reflected on the countless instances of discrimination he'd experienced throughout his career. The professor who suggested he'd be more comfortable in a trade school. The airline executives who spoke to his white colleagues instead of him in meetings. The first-class flight attendants who repeatedly asked to see his boarding pass. Each incident had built his resolve to create a different kind of company. And now, that resolve was being tested in the most public way possible. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Zoe stood in the doorway, already in her pajamas. "I saw the videos," she said quietly. "The way they treated you, it was wrong." Jamal gestured for her to come sit beside him. "Yes, it was. Some people online are saying you overreacted. That you ruined those people's lives." "Actions have consequences," Jamal said carefully. "I didn't ruin their lives. They made choices that cost them their jobs." Zoe considered this. "In piano, my teacher says mistakes are inevitable, but what matters is how you respond to them. Maybe they could have apologized and learned from it." It was the kind of insight that often surprised Jamal, his daughter's ability to see nuance where others saw only absolutes. Sometimes, sweetheart, the mistake reveals a deeper problem. These weren't people who made a single error, they showed a pattern of behavior that harmed people based on race. The supervisor told me to know my place. That reveals something fundamental about how he sees black passengers. Zoe nodded slowly. When Emily hit a wrong note at the recital tonight, she kept playing. But if she'd stopped, thrown her music on the floor, and walked off stage, that would show she shouldn't be performing yet. Exactly, Jamal smiled. The issue wasn't the mistake, it was the character revealed by the mistake. As Zoe headed to bed, Jamal returned to the flood of messages on his phone. Among them was a notification that the Skyline Airways board had called an emergency meeting for 7 a.m. Public pressure was mounting on both sides, and by morning, he would need to defend not just his actions, but the values upon which he'd built his entire company. What he didn't expect was the email that arrived at 2:43 a.m. from an unlikely source, Tyler Reynolds, one of the fired flight attendants, with the subject line, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The Skyline Airways executive boardroom on the 47th floor of their Atlanta headquarters offered panoramic views of the city skyline, though none of the 12 people seated around the polished mahogany table were admiring the vista that morning. All attention was focused on the large display screen showing the company's stock price, down 7.8% since market opening. 7.8%, repeated Franklin Pierce, the board chairman, a silver-haired man with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for prioritizing profit above all else. That's nearly $300 million in company value evaporated overnight because of how this situation was handled. Jamal sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed despite the tension in the room. He had anticipated this reaction, had prepared for it. Beside him, Samantha Taylor and Brandon Lewis represented his executive leadership team, while Natalie Chen from PR monitored social media trends on her tablet. With respect, Franklin, Jamal replied evenly, "I didn't call this emergency meeting to discuss stock fluctuations, which we all know are temporary. I called it to affirm that Skyline Airways stands by its core values, regardless of market reactions." Board member Victoria Winters, representing the company's largest institutional investor, leaned forward. "Values don't pay dividends, Jamal. Stability does. Firing an entire flight crew publicly, without following our standard disciplinary procedures, creates instability." "I disagree," Jamal countered. "What creates instability is allowing discriminatory behavior to continue unchecked. What damages our brand is becoming known as an airline where passengers of color receive inferior service." Howard Tanaka, the board's longest-serving member, removed his glasses thoughtfully. "The optics of this situation are certainly complex. On one hand, a decisive stance against discrimination. On the other, questions about due process for the employees." "Due process?" Samantha Taylor interjected, unable to contain herself. I witnessed the aftermath firsthand. Multiple passengers have provided statements confirming the discriminatory treatment. The flight supervisor told our CEO to know his place. What further process was needed? Franklin Pierce raised a hand to silence her. Samantha, while your loyalty is commendable, this board needs to consider all angles. William Bennett has already held a press conference announcing a wrongful termination lawsuit. Conservative media is framing this as reverse discrimination. We're facing boycott threats from multiple groups. Jamal opened a folder in front of him. Before we continue this discussion, I'd like to present some information that hasn't been made public yet. He distributed documents to each board member, customer satisfaction reports for flights operated by the terminated crew over the past year. As you can see, Jamal continued as they reviewed the papers, this particular crew has received 27 formal complaints in the past 11 months. 17 of those complaints specifically mentioned discriminatory treatment toward passengers of color or passengers with accents suggesting foreign origin. 3 of those complaints reached my office directly, and I personally ensured they were investigated. The board members exchanged glances as they examined the data. Each time, Jamal continued, Flight Supervisor Kevin Peterson dismissed the complaints as misunderstandings or passengers with unrealistic expectations. Each time, regional management accepted his assessment without further investigation. So yes, we had processes in place, processes that failed repeatedly to address a pattern of discrimination. Howard Tanaka looked up from the documents. If this pattern was established, why wasn't action taken sooner? An excellent question, Jamal acknowledged. One that I've been asking our regional management team since 5 a.m. today. It appears Mr. Peterson had connections within middle management that created a blind spot in our oversight systems. Victoria Winters set down the reports with a frown. This information changes the context significantly. Why isn't this part of our public response? Natalie Chen answered, we're preparing a comprehensive statement that includes this data while respecting privacy laws. It will be released later today, once legal has approved the final language. For the next hour, the board debated strategy, liability, and public messaging. Throughout the discussion, Jamal noticed Franklin Pierce becoming increasingly isolated as other board members aligned with the CEO's position. Finally, Pierce made one last attempt to assert control. While these reports are concerning, the manner of termination remains problematic. A public firing, without HR processes, exposes us to significant liability. At minimum, Jamal, you should issue a statement acknowledging that your approach, while well-intentioned, was procedurally flawed. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Jamal. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. Franklin, let me be very clear. I will not apologize for taking immediate action against discrimination on my airline. I will not pretend that bigotry deserves the courtesy of gradual correction. And if this board cannot stand firmly behind equal treatment for all passengers, then perhaps I'm not the right CEO for Skyline Airways. The implied resignation threat sent a visible shock through the room. Despite occasional disagreements, Jamal's leadership had transformed Skyline from a struggling regional carrier to a respected national airline. His departure would devastate investor confidence far more than any single incident. Howard Tanaka broke the tense silence. I believe I speak for the majority when I say that won't be necessary, Jamal. Your leadership remains essential to this company's success and values. One by one, board members nodded in agreement, until only Franklin Pierce remained opposed. Recognizing his isolation, the chairman relented with visible reluctance. Very well. The board supports your decision. But this situation must be managed carefully moving forward. No more surprises. As the meeting concluded, Brandon Lewis approached Jamal with a notification on his tablet. Sir, there's something you should see. Tyler Reynolds has gone public with a statement supporting your account of events and admitting to discriminatory behavior. It's gaining significant traction online. Jamal reviewed the statement, The same Reynolds had emailed him in the middle of the night, now posted publicly. It read in part, "I was wrong. The treatment Mr. Washington received was discriminatory, and I participated in it. While losing my job is painful, it's a consequence I earned through my actions. I'm grateful for this wake-up call and am committed to recognizing and addressing my own biases moving forward." The statement had already been shared tens of thousands of times, creating cracks in the narrative Heather Brooks and her attorney were promoting. As the boardroom emptied, Samantha remained behind with Jamal. "That was a risk," she said quietly. "Putting your position on the line." Jamal shook his head. "It wasn't a bluff, Sam. Some principles aren't negotiable. If Skyline can't stand for equality, I don't belong here." Well, it worked. The board backed down. For now, Jamal acknowledged. But this fight is far from over. Bennett is a skilled attorney, and he'll use every tool available to frame his client as the victim. "And Tyler Reynolds' statement?" Samantha asked. "That could change the dynamics considerably." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "It already has. One honest voice can sometimes cut through all the noise." As they prepared to leave, Jamal's phone buzzed with an incoming text from his mentor, Carlton Hayes. "Saw the news. This is why I backed you all those years ago. Standing with you. Arriving in Atlanta tonight." For the first time since the incident began, Jamal felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. The battle ahead would be challenging, but he wouldn't be fighting it alone. The press conference orchestrated by attorney William Bennett was a masterclass in narrative framing. Held in the ballroom of an upscale Atlanta hotel, the event featured Heather Brooks seated beside Bennett, her appearance carefully crafted to project vulnerability and professionalism simultaneously. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail, her makeup subtle, her navy blazer conservative and unassuming. "What we're witnessing is the alarming trend of reverse discrimination masquerading as social justice," Bennett declared to the assembled journalists, his voice resonating with practiced indignation. "Ms. Brooks and her colleagues have served Skyline Airways with distinction for years. Their careers were destroyed in an instant because they failed to recognize their CEO who was deliberately traveling incognito." Cameras flashed as Heather dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I've dedicated 8 years to customer service," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "To be labeled a racist and fired publicly without any chance to defend myself, it's devastating." Bennett placed a supportive hand on her shoulder before continuing. "Mr. Washington has created a culture of fear where white employees walk on eggshells, terrified that any interaction with passengers of color could end their careers. This isn't equality, it's intimidation." Across town at Skyline headquarters, Jamal watched the broadcast with his crisis management team. Natalie Chen winced at Bennett's skillful manipulation of events, while Brandon Lewis made notes on potential legal vulnerabilities. "He's good," Jamal acknowledged. "Making it about fear rather than accountability. Painting her as the victim." "Social media is split," Natalie reported, scrolling through analytics. Bennett's reverse discrimination narrative is gaining traction in certain demographics. #StandWithHeather is trending in several states. The door opened, and Carlton Hayes entered the conference room. At 72, the former airline executive still commanded attention with his imposing height and distinguished appearance. Jamal rose immediately to embrace his mentor. "Sorry I'm late," Carlton said. "Traffic from the airport was terrible." "You didn't have to come," Jamal said, though his relief at seeing his mentor was evident. "Yes, I did," Carlton replied firmly. "Because 30 years ago, I was that black passenger being ignored in first class with no power to do anything about it. What you did took courage." Their reunion was interrupted as the press conference continued on screen. Bennett was now taking questions, expertly deflecting challenges to his narrative. When asked about witness accounts confirming the discrimination, Bennett dismissed them as passengers caught up in the moment, influenced by Mr. Washington's position of authority. When questioned about the "know your place" comment, He characterized it as an unfortunate choice of words taken out of context during a stressful situation. Watching Bennett's performance, Jamal felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the sensation he'd experienced countless times when encountering systems designed to minimize or dismiss racial bias. The ability to reframe discrimination as misunderstanding, to cast appropriate consequences as overreaction. "We need to respond," Samantha urged. "He's controlling the narrative." Jamal shook his head. "Not yet. Let him finish. We respond once, with everything." As the press conference concluded, Bennett announced plans for a wrongful termination lawsuit seeking $40 million in damages. Outside the hotel, a small but vocal group of protesters held signs reading, "Skyline Unfair," and "Due Process Matters." Back at headquarters, Carlton Hayes watched the coverage with a grim expression. "Some things never change," he observed. "New decade, same tactics." Jamal's phone chimed with an incoming message, from an unexpected source. "This is interesting," he said, reading the text. "Kevin Peterson's ex-girlfriend works in our HR department. She says she has information about previous incidents that were covered up." Within hours, Skyline's legal team had interviewed the woman, who provided documentation showing Peterson had systematically buried discrimination complaints against Heather Brooks and several other flight attendants for years. The evidence included emails where Peterson explicitly instructed regional managers to handle these complaints quietly and keep them out of the system. "This changes everything," Brandon Lewis said, reviewing the documents. "It establishes a pattern of concealment that prevented our normal processes from working." Meanwhile, Natalie Chen received notification that Tyler Reynolds had agreed to a televised interview about his experience as part of Brooks' crew. "He's willing to go on record about the culture of discrimination that existed under Peterson's supervision," she reported. As the team strategized their response, protests outside Skyline's offices grew larger, though Jamal noted they were dwarfed by counter-protesters supporting his actions. The hashtag #FlyWithDignity had emerged as a rallying cry for those who had experienced similar discrimination while traveling. Carlton Hayes watched the developing situation with the perspective of someone who had witnessed decades of America's struggle with race. "You know what the real problem is for Bennett and his client?" the older man observed. "They expected you to follow the script." "What script is that?" Jamal asked. "The one where black people swallow their dignity for the comfort of others. The one where we accept discrimination as the price of participation. The one where even black men with power choose comfort over confrontation." Carlton's eyes held decades of hard-won wisdom. "You tore up that script, son. That's what really scares them." The conversation was interrupted when Samantha burst into the room, her expression urgent. "We have a breakthrough. Security just contacted me about footage from the flight." "What footage?" Jamal asked. "I was told the cabin cameras weren't recording." "They weren't," Samantha confirmed. "But a passenger in 4C was filming a birthday message for his mother when he captured the exchange between you and Peterson in the background. It clearly shows Peterson saying that 'know your place' comment, and it contradicts Bennett's claim about it being taken out of context." The team reviewed the footage, 18 seconds of damning evidence that supported Jamal's account completely. In the video, Peterson's condescending tone and body language were unmistakable, as was the disdain in his expression when he told Jamal to "know your place and be grateful." Natalie Chen immediately recognized the potential impact. This directly contradicts what Bennett claimed at the press conference. Combined with the evidence of buried complaints and Tyler Reynolds' testimony, we have everything we need for a comprehensive response. As the team prepared their strategy, Jamal experienced a moment of doubt. He stepped away to the window overlooking Atlanta, considering the escalating situation. What had begun as a personal stand against discrimination had evolved into a public battle with far-reaching implications. Carlton joined him at the window, sensing his protégé's uncertainty. "Having second thoughts?" the older man asked. "Not about the decision," Jamal clarified. "About the spotlight." This isn't just about those 4 employees anymore. It's becoming a referendum on how we address discrimination in America. Carlton nodded understanding. That weight is familiar, isn't it? The burden of knowing your individual actions suddenly represents something larger. I just wanted to run an airline where everyone is treated with dignity, Jamal said quietly. And that simple expectation became revolutionary the moment you enforced it, Carlton replied. That's always been the pattern. The most basic demands for equality are framed as radical until they become inevitable. Their conversation was interrupted by Brandon Lewis, who approached with a tablet displaying breaking news. Sir, you need to see this. Tyler Reynolds just finished his interview, and it's powerful. The screen showed Reynolds, his expression somber and sincere as he addressed the interviewer. I participated in something wrong, something I knew was wrong even as it was happening. I could have spoken up. I could have treated Mr. Washington with the respect every passenger deserves. Instead, I followed Ms. Brooks' lead because it was easier. I'm not asking for my job back. I'm simply telling the truth because it's the right thing to do, even if it's late. The interview had already accumulated hundreds of thousands of views in just minutes, and #TruthMatters was trending alongside clips of Reynolds' testimony. As Jamal watched the young man take responsibility for his actions, he felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, certainly, but also a measure of respect for Reynolds' courage to publicly acknowledge his mistakes. Looks like your counterattack just received unexpected reinforcement, Carlton observed. Samantha approached with determination in her eyes. We're ready when you are, sir. Legal has approved our response, and Natalie has media lined up for a statement. Jamal straightened his tie and nodded. Let's set the record straight. 3 weeks after Flight 1387 landed in Atlanta, Jamal Washington stood before a packed auditorium at Skyline Airways headquarters. Every seat was filled with employees ranging from baggage handlers to executive vice presidents. Those who couldn't attend in person watched via live stream across the company's locations worldwide. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as Jamal approached the podium. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady and resolute. 3 weeks ago, an incident occurred that forced us to examine whether we truly live the values we profess. Today, I want to share the outcomes of that examination and the path forward for Skyline Airways. In the front row, Samantha Taylor and Brandon Lewis sat alongside Carlton Hayes, who had postponed his return to retirement to help navigate the crisis. Behind them were team members who had worked tirelessly through the tumultuous aftermath. First, let me address the legal matters, Jamal continued. Yesterday, attorney William Bennett withdrew the wrongful termination lawsuit filed on behalf of Heather Brooks. This decision followed the public release of security footage, documented evidence of suppressed complaints, and testimony from multiple witnesses including former flight attendant Tyler Reynolds. The audience murmured in response. The lawsuit's collapse had made headlines across the country. While this resolution allows us to move forward, it doesn't erase the fundamental issues revealed by this incident. The discrimination I experienced wasn't created by 4 individuals alone. It was enabled by systems that allowed bias to go unchecked and unaddressed. Jamal moved from behind the podium, preferring to speak directly to his employees without barriers. Effective immediately, Skyline Airways is launching our Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive approach to ensuring that every passenger receives equitable treatment regardless of race, gender, religion, or background. On the large screen behind him, details of the initiative appeared. Mandatory bias recognition training for all customer-facing staff, anonymous reporting systems for passengers experiencing discrimination, revision of hiring practices to increase diversity at all levels, regular, blind, service quality checks by undisclosed evaluators, zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior with clear enforcement protocols. This initiative isn't punishment, Jamal emphasized. It's progress. It's acknowledging that we can do better, that we must do better, for our passengers and for each other. The announcement was met with sustained applause, particularly from employees of color who had long advocated for more robust anti-discrimination measures. Additionally, Jamal continued, once the applause subsided, I've had time to reflect on my own actions during this incident. While I stand by the decision to terminate employees who exhibited clear discriminatory behavior, I recognize that public confrontation created challenges for our entire Skyline family. This acknowledgement of the complicated nature of the situation seemed to resonate with many in the audience. In that spirit of reflection, I've made a personal decision regarding Tyler Reynolds, who demonstrated courage by publicly acknowledging his mistakes and taking responsibility for his actions. Murmurs spread through the auditorium. Mr. Reynolds will be offered conditional reinstatement, subject to completion of our new training program and a 6-month probationary period in our customer experience department. His willingness to learn and grow deserves recognition, just as harmful behavior deserved consequences. The announcement generated mixed reactions, some nodding in approval at the gesture of forgiveness, others expressing reservation through their expressions. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Jamal clarified, sensing the room's tension. It means creating space for growth and transformation. The same standard will apply to any former employee who acknowledges past discriminatory behavior and commits to change. As the town hall continued, Jamal outlined additional changes coming to Skyline Airways, including the establishment of a scholarship program for minorities pursuing careers in aviation and a partnership with civil rights organizations to develop industry-wide best practices. The impact of Flight 1387 had extended far beyond Skyline. In the weeks following the incident, 3 other major airlines had announced reviews of their own anti-discrimination policies. The viral nature of the confrontation had sparked national conversation about race and accountability in corporate America. After the formal presentation concluded, Jamal made himself available for questions from employees. For over an hour, he listened and responded to concerns, suggestions, and expressions of support. Throughout the exchange, his message remained consistent: accountability and growth could coexist. As the event wound down, Jamal found a quiet moment with Carlton Hayes. "What do you think?" Jamal asked his mentor. "Did we get it right?" Carlton considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "There's no perfect response to imperfect situations. But you stood firm on principles while leaving room for redemption. That balance is as right as it gets in this complicated world." Later that evening, Jamal sat with his daughter Zoe in their home, sharing dinner and conversation about her day at school. "Dad," she said suddenly, setting down her fork, "one of my teachers used our class discussion to talk about what happened with you and that flight crew. He asked us whether we thought you did the right thing." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "And what did you say?" "I said my father taught me that standing up against wrong treatment isn't just for yourself, it's for everyone who might face it after you." She smiled slightly. "And then I said I was proud of you." Jamal reached across the table to squeeze his daughter's hand, emotion tightening his throat. 2 days later, Jamal Washington boarded Skyline Airways Flight 2241 from Atlanta to Chicago. As before, he traveled without announcement or fanfare, dressed in casual clothes with only his boarding pass identifying him as a first-class passenger. The difference was immediately apparent. The lead flight attendant, a young woman named Monica Harris, greeted him with the same warm professionalism she showed to every passenger. When he requested water after takeoff, it arrived promptly. His meal preference was honored without question. Throughout the flight, he observed consistent, respectful service being provided to all passengers regardless of appearance. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Jamal reflected on the journey, not just the flight, but the challenging weeks since that fateful day on Flight 1387. The stock price had recovered as public support solidified behind Skyline's transparent approach to addressing discrimination. The board, including a chastened Franklin Pierce, had unanimously approved the Dignity Initiative's budget. And perhaps most meaningfully, Jamal had received thousands of messages from people of color sharing their own experiences of discrimination while traveling and expressing gratitude for his willingness to use his position to demand change. Change, Jamal knew, was rarely comfortable and never complete. The work of creating truly equitable spaces would continue long after this particular incident faded from headlines. But in this moment, watching his flight attendants provide dignified service to every passenger regardless of color, Jamal Washington allowed himself to feel something that had eluded him throughout the turbulent aftermath: hope. This powerful story teaches us that meaningful change often requires courage to confront discrimination directly. Jamal demonstrated that leadership isn't just about building successful companies, it's about creating environments where everyone is treated with dignity. True power comes not from position or title, but from how we use our influence to challenge injustice. The incident shows how discrimination often operates in subtle ways, through different service standards or dismissive language rather than overt hostility. Recognizing these patterns is essential for addressing systemic bias. Equally important was Jamal's willingness to balance accountability with redemption, showing that standing firm against discrimination doesn't mean abandoning compassion. Perhaps most significantly, the story reminds us that individual actions can catalyze broader change. By refusing to accept discriminatory treatment, Jamal sparked industry-wide reforms that benefited countless travelers. Sometimes, the most powerful response to injustice is simply refusing to accept it as normal. Has someone ever treated you differently because of who you are? How did you respond? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might help others feel less alone. If this account of standing against racism resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of courage and justice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to speak up when facing discrimination. Thank you for being part of our community that believes in dignity for all. Remember, change begins when one person says, "This is not acceptable, not today, not anymore."